Westward expansion and war. Hmm.
Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to C-List Social Studies. I know I've talked to you about this before, and I've talked to you about westward expansion, American settlers moving west, and the act of war that usually comes along with it. So, if you remember, at the end of the last chapter, Texas became an independent nation. The United States did not want to annex it because of the slavery issue, right? What is, are we going to make Texas a slave state and imbalance the slave and the free states in the Senate and Congress, and all of a sudden now slave states have more votes? Nah, let's just keep them in limbo and let them be an independent nation. It kind of gives us a buffer between Mexico and the United States. Well, that has to come to an end at some point in time, and here it is, 1846 to 1847, the Mexican-American War. What you have here is a dispute over land. And here's what happens. John Tyler serves one term as a president, and then Democrat James Polk is elected, and he's in favor of acquiring two things: Oregon and Texas. He wants to have Americans really fulfill that idea of manifest destiny, taking and settling all the lands between the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. So in Oregon, you have the Oregon Territory that kind of moved up into Canada, and Polk was able to avoid war with Britain because Britain is in charge of Canada at the time, and you have now a possible war that was going to happen, but instead Polk negotiates a treaty over the Oregon, United States and Canadian border, which is south of the 49th parallel line, and now we have Oregon as a territory in 1848, so Americans are able to go and settle into that territory. So now that gets us to the Pacific Ocean. Now you have to wonder about that big area in the middle of the United States, specifically southern central United States, and that is Texas. So Polk says, I want Texas. I want that land. So he annexes Texas in 1845, which really starts to anger Mexican officials. So we have a dispute, and it's a border dispute between the United States and Texas. Now, what the dispute is over, it's over this, if you look into the map there on the right hand side, that's going to be the disputed area between what the United States and Mexico views as what the border of Texas should be. The United States, right down here along this border here, that's the Rio Grande River. That is the river that the United States felt that the border or southern border of Texas, which actually divides Texas and Mexico today, that's what the United States viewed it as. That's not what Mexico viewed as the dividing landmark or physical feature between Mexico and the United States. Mexico believed that it was up here on the Nueces River. So now you have this disputed area. Whose is it? Is it belong to the United States or does it belong to Mexico? And we're going to have to fight a war to figure it out. So what the United States tries to do first, in order to acquire this land, they send John Slidell down to Mexico to try to buy that land, New Mexico, right there, the yellow one, and parts of California for $30 million. Well, the Mexican government refused to even speak to Slidell, and like basically that's it. We're going to go to war. So Polk orders General Zachary Taylor and his army to the border region around the Rio Grande down here in 1846. And this is where American troops clash with the Mexican army in April. Now, if you remember Santa Anna, right, from the Battle of the Alamo, he actually returns into this Mexican-American War. So here's a border dispute again, right? Mexico believes it's by the Neuse River, and the United States believe it's on the Rio Grande River, which it is today. So check this out, right? Here's how this works. Now, here's a couple of battles we're going to get into, but I want to cover this first. Since Texas's battle, or since Texas's war for revolution, Santa Anna was kicked out of Mexico and he was exiling in Cuba. And what Santa Anna does is he actually tells President Polk, he says, hey, listen, bro, you let me go back to Mexico and I'm going to squash this whole thing. I'll make the deal happen. The land is yours. We're going to be good to go. Well, Santa Anna lied to Polk, and this is where he comes back into play. Santa Anna goes back to Mexico, regains his fame and power in the army. And what you have really in the Mexican-American War is a well-trained, well-prepared U.S. Army versus a large, poor morale, very unprepared Mexican army. Even though they're under Santa Anna, they're still very much unprepared. So we're going to cover three main battles here. The Buena Vista battle. Taylor's forces defeated the Mexican army under Santa Anna in Buena Vista in 1847. Santa Anna and his men flee overnight. There's heavy casualties on both sides. And actually, believe it or not, both Taylor and Santa Anna claim victory here, but there was about 3,700 Mexican casualties compared to 700 American casualties. So Taylor actually claims victory in Buena Vista. And there's not very many Mexican victory in here at all, because in Buena Vista, there was originally about 20,000 Mexican soldiers against only about 4,500 Americans. So that tells you the size difference, and the fact that, Taylor was able to defeat Santa Anna so easily tells you the unpreparedness and the poor morale of the Mexican army. The next one is the Battle of Veracruz, and this is where General Winfield Scott, and you'll actually see him come up a lot. He was a very prominent general for a long time, and actually even into the Civil War. He knew the importance of the port of Veracruz in March 1847. He knew he needed that port to be able to move inland. It was the strongest fortress in Mexico. Winfield Scott actually took his men about 3 miles south of Veracruz, marched them up, and he sieged the city, and the city finally surrendered, the strongest fortress in Mexico to the United States. And the last one we're going to cover is New Mexico. Scott's troops took Mexico City in 1847 after a brave defensive by the Mexican soldiers. There was about 16,000 demoralized men under Santa Anna, compared to about the 7,200 in Scott's American army. And actually, Ulysses S. Grant, the future commanding general of the Union Army in the Civil War, he plays a big part in taking Mexico City. They literally siege Mexico City and squish all of the people, all the Mexican army, into Mexico City. And then again, Santa Anna is able to flee and is defeated at the battle at Mexico City. So basically, the war is over at this point in time. It wasn't the last battle really, but it really signaled the beginning of the end to Santa Anna and the Mexican army. So what actually ends the Mexican-American War? And it sits right here. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo officially ends the war in 1848. Now, what this gives the United States, of course, is the right to Texas, but it also gives us what we call the Mexican Cession right there, the Mexican Cession. And this includes present-day California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. And some of those are just little parts of the area. But I mean, this is the crazy thing. We originally went in there to try to buy some of that territory for $30 million. And instead, Mexico wants to fight a war over it. We fight a war over it. We end the war with this Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and we literally just take this Mexican cession from Mexico. These are areas that were protected in the free enjoyment of the liberty and property and secured in the free exercise of religion. So now you have the Southwest Territory, this Mexican cession, who are able to do things like practice religion freely. Also included Texas, north of the Rio Grande. That's where we set our boundaries, and it increases the size of the United States by about 25%. Now, there's that little arrow, or the big arrow pointing to that little land down there. That's what we call the Gadsden Purchase. The Gadsden Purchase in 1853, the United States wound up paying another $10 million for southern parts of Arizona and New Mexico, and we actually needed this land for the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. That's why we purchased this land. So now that gives you the southern border of the United States. We get that southern border through the Mexican-American War and the acquisition of the Mexican cession.